I was born in the 80s and lived with my family in Kensal Rise, northwest London, a community that to this day has a large African Caribbean population and for me is synonymous with both its neighbouring community of Harlesden and the Notting Hill Carnival. My family lived on Bathurst Gardens, and within a few years we moved to a bigger house on the outskirts of North London in an area called Ponders End. Ponders End is in the borough of Enfield and bears contrast to northwest London. It was mainly white with a small Asian community and a few sprinkles of African Caribbean people. I began formal school at Alma Primary in Ponders End, and I attended British school for just over a year before my family migrated to Jamaica. My father, a quiet man, had a painting and decorating business, and my mother, a formal legal secretary who was a creative at heart, attended fashion college and was on her way to becoming a fashion designer. Both of my parents are Jamaican born and travelled to the UK as teens as part of the Windrush migration. They met each other in London in the mid-70s at a time when afros were popular and reggae music from Jamaica provided the musical backdrop for the Windrush generation. The music was loving and revolutionary at this time, with social-political messages about Rastafarian-induced black power and embracing one's black African roots being a theme alongside sensual love songs melodically draped over intoxicatingly heavy sound system breaking bass lines. My parents appeared to exist both in and outside of mainstream society. Decidedly Afrocentric, they were inspired by the works and philosophies of the iconic Jamaican black liberation leader, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, national hero of Jamaica and global emblem of black nationalism, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, rebellious artists like Peter Tosh and Bob Marley, and the Jamaican heroes Nanny of the Maroons, Paul Bogle and Sam Sharp. They were melanin proud and welcomed revolutionary thinking. My parents, or maybe mostly my mother, rejected organized religion, specifically any religions associated with the legalization of the triangular trade and the enforcement of European standards of culture and beauty. She disliked her experiences attending the Catholic Church as a child and appeared to look to Africa for her salvation. My parents were rebellious nonconformists with a thirst for power and an appetite for art, which led them to live a different life to most people. They didn't resonate with the aspect of Rastafari that had become religious and supports the deification of the culture's namesake, Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. They respected his legacy and resonated with Marcus Garvey's calls for self-reliance and the love your beautiful African identity aspect of Rasta. My father was a silent force and my mother was a vocal one. She was well-read and had colourful opinions regarding race, culture, religion and conformity. As a young child, I would attend activist and cultural events in London with my mother and her Afrocentric friends, who were all draped in African prints and cowrie shells. I would learn from my mother, in addition to core subjects like English and maths, in what seemed to be an ongoing oral tradition. My brother and I were taught about the great history of Africa, the triangular trade, racism, apartheid, Christianity as a nemesis of black love, cultural resistance, colorism, racism in the media, and Babylon. These subjects, in addition to Anansi folk stories, Jamaican folk songs, and the many books we read, colourfully filled my parents' home. The stories were often accompanied by African drumming, whether at home or in a public event. We would sing resistant chants as often as a Christian sang church hymns. We sang against all manner of discrimination on the planet. Apartheid afimo, dem afimo. My mother was pro-black, pro-education, pro-arts and pro-freedom. I spoke about her violent and restrictive childhood in episode 1. I do feel that some of her efforts were due to not feeling free to be herself and safe as a child. My brother, 4 years my senior, had attended dance school before I was born and before I was old enough to legally be a theatre arts student. I begged so many times and was allowed an early admission into the ballet class of the highly respected Miss Billings of Shepherd's Bush, London. Theatre arts, ballet, tap and jazz were my favourite things from as early as I can remember, and definitely before I started formal school. When I started attending school in Enfield, I was about 5 years old. I found school likeable enough, although coming from a Jamaican family, I remember being a bit scornful sometimes, and I once got in trouble because I refused to drink another child's leftover milk. I remember being put out of my classroom by my teacher, who complained that I was answering too many of her questions. My mother had come to the school to pick me up at the close of the school day, and upon seeing me standing outside of the classroom door, asked why I wasn't in class. I told her that I had been penalised for answering questions, which upset her and led to my mother having a serious talk with this teacher, who she accused of being racist. When my mother migrated to the UK at age 9, she experienced a lot of racism from her white educators and classmates alike. She would tell us about the teachers in the UK in the 60s and 70s. They were overtly racist, often discouraging budding black minds from pursuing careers of value. They worked to sabotage both the imaginations and future successes of their black students with white supremacist rhetoric. To my mother, this was another example of the racist tendency to cut down intelligent young black people at their youngest and to dull their shine. Our family had already been travelling to Kingston and living there for months at a time. My mother decided to leave the United Kingdom, with my father supporting her decision. He had financial ease and was able to swiftly fund this move. In addition to his painting and decorating business, he had another more secretive and underground business that funded a way above the average lifestyle. My father is originally from Kingston, Jamaica, and came from one of the most socially deprived parts of Kingston back then and still up to quite recently. Trenchtown, known as the home of reggae and Bob Marley, was a complex and politically influenced ghetto. In Jamaica, many deprived communities called ghettos and garrisons have been historically used within political warfare. The parties bring weapons and funds into the communities and instigate political wars in order to enforce, not sway, voting outcomes. Within 15 years of Jamaica gaining independence from Britain, Trenchtown became a world-famous slum that birthed hundreds of reggae icons and a community that has historically been at the beck and call of corrupt politicians who are known for forcing both men and women into political gun wars in a bid to secure and protect territories and also to create social dependence while keeping Jamaica functioning in mediocrity. My father had a very humble beginning living with his 5 siblings and was born to his Afro-Jamaican mother and father, Ivy Williams and Rupert Sims, in Trenchtown. His grandmothers, Miss Saab, aka Old Lady, who was biracial and Afro-Jamaican, and Roberta Sims, aka Aunt Belle, who was Afro-Jamaican and Afro-Cuban, also lived in Trenchtown with their children and extended family members. I met both of them when I was younger, and I am thankful for this blessing. My father's father, who I speak about meeting in episode 2, had migrated during Windrush to the UK, and he didn't meet him until he was sent to the UK in the mid-1960s at 13 years old. Left just before the political violence infiltrated Trenchtown, but his family stayed behind and had to endure it. He schooled in Kingston while living in this time of harsh deprivation and a lack of social mobility. Everyone was trying to get ahead, and most would do whatever it took to do so. I know that unlike my mother, who was born to married and stable parents who came from the countryside, my father and his siblings would have experienced so much scarcity, social deprivation, and lack that my mother simply wouldn't have been able to relate to. However, both of my parents didn't have their father around as children, and in my mother's case, as I explore in episode 1, her mother too. When my father learned that he was soon to migrate to the UK, he became worried about going to live with a man he didn't know and kept running away from home. He was captured and locked up in his bedroom for 3 weeks and prevented from venturing into the streets until it was time for him to board the ship. It seemed that his destiny was one of suffering, from his harsh childhood in Jamaica to being sent away in such a forceful manner, although it was thought, given the poor economic climate of Jamaica and his disadvantages, it would be of great benefit. When my father arrived in London, he was met by his father, Rupert Sims, and moved into a tiny house with him. He said it was so cold that people put their shopping on the window ledges to remain cool for use when needed. Although he had come from a garrison, he found life in London rather strange, as at this time people did not have individual bathrooms in their houses and would take a weekly visit to the public bathhouses to bathe. For the rest of the week, water would be boiled and mixed with cold water in a plastic basin for what we in Jamaica call a tidy. Shortly after landing, he was shocked to see his own father bring a woman into their shared bed and have sex with her while he was lying right beside them. This exposure to sex is a toxic side of child abuse within Jamaican culture that most ignore. Unfortunately, it still exists today. After my father was in the UK for a year, his father told him that he would be going away for a few days. My father took care of himself with the food and provisions that had been set aside for him. Several days later, his supply had started to run low, and he began to worry while looking out for his father's soon return. Unknown to him, my grandfather had lied to him, and he would never see him again. Most shockingly, my paternal grandfather had told his son that he would be going away for a short trip, when the truth was he had migrated to the USA and would never return to the UK. This was so traumatic for my father. He was eventually taken into foster care by the British government and lived in a children's home until he was an adult. During this time, he discovered his father's true destination, and being so far from his community of people who had known and loved him from birth, he felt truly isolated and alone in the world. From this point, there was no family around to supervise, guide, or care for my father in any way. To further impact the suffering my father felt at the loss of his father, he would never get the chance to see his mother again, as she would die a few years later from unexpected terminal illness. This broke him deeply. For this reason, I often empathize deeply with him, as in my eyes, his life was tainted by his own heritage and culture from birth. Both of my parents have suffered deep psychological trauma at the hands of their fathers in childhood, more specifically the teenage years. When they met each other in their 20s, they had not healed or addressed these issues properly, which unfortunately is usually the case. Trauma bonding is commonplace amongst survivors of child abuse, and child abuse is commonplace amongst Jamaican people. It would cause a cataclysmic effect of tragedy later in their lives. My mother and her siblings were always vocal about their experiences, but similarly to the famous Jamaican saying, "Silent rivers run deep," no one apart from my dad really knows the depths of his experiences in Trenchtown and then in London when he was abandoned by his father as a teen. From the little he has shared with me and what I have gathered over the years, it wasn't good. As my father came up in the late 60s and 70s, he gained his independence by working a wide range of jobs, from a speaker boy on a sound system to a painter and decorator. He had a wide network of friends from all walks of life and was drawn to the illicit world of narcotics. I'm sure he started off as the local weed man, But by the time I was born, my father was getting ready to expand his nationwide marijuana organization and would go straight to the source by becoming a drug lord of his own global cartel. He organized systems for the safe and undetected trafficking of copious amounts of marijuana from the docks of Jamaica to the shores of the UK, while concealing his underground lifestyle with his legal business. My father became a millionaire in his 30s. When my family migrated to Jamaica, it was the late 1980s, and it appeared as if Mandeville had never seen people like my parents before. They wore long, beautiful locks in their hair and were groomed, meticulous, and extraordinarily wealthy. My parents attracted a lot of attention wherever they went and inspired others to look and be like them. To this day, I have friends who locked their hair and believe in self-reliance because of my parents. My mother designed and sewed regal attire that was modern in style with an African theme. Her clients included most of Mandeville's elite and some of Jamaica's most prominent artists, including Tony Rebel, Yassa Safari, and the now deceased Garnet Silk. My father split each year living between Jamaica and the UK, closely monitoring his cartel and workers. His painting and decorating business partner wanted to expand and develop their own paint line. However, unknown to him, my father was already wealthy and didn't see the value in what would actually turn out to be a multi-billion-pound UK paint brand and business that still flourishes today. In our personal family life, we had some amazing and unforgettable years, but after some time, our parents' relationship began to show cracks and became toxic. For the most part, we all disliked when my father was around. Although my father's drug cartel was no secret, which could be seen in the presence of marijuana drying on the roof of the family house each day, and various contraptions for the storage of marijuana while shipping in the backyard, there were many secrets being kept. I always find it funny when I watch the TV series Power, and the children don't know that their father was a drug dealer. We weren't told as children to keep many secrets, but my dad's cartel was definitely something that we were not told to keep secrets. Maybe my parents assumed that we knew to, or they didn't really care. They could also have been too intoxicated with Mary Jane to think about that. There were some secrets that would consume the family like a bug in a Venus flytrap. I will explore in the next episode more about our house of secrets. Let's just say there was never a dull moment, and rather than feeling like childhood memories, a lot of it feels like a TV drama. Year after year, decade after decade, I saw the unfolding of all the secrets that were kept in the dark. After a lifetime of bearing witness to the highest degree of familial collapse and running as far away from it as humanly possible, I had my first Dafa, a traditional Yoruba spiritual reading that I mentioned in episode 2. My maternal grandfather, Wesley Saunders, had passed away 16 years prior. He came up throughout my reading and was disturbed by the destruction and misfortune my family had experienced. He saw my parents as being unable to heal from their childhood and adult wounds, rendered ineffective, their mental health and ability to thrive consistently, even professionally, being thwarted by generational blockages. He felt that they had tragically lost their way, and he saw this as having dire consequences for the next generations, which included myself and the new generation of children. I was advised to make an ebo, a grand offering to the Orisha that would support my healing, wellness, stability, and longevity. As much as I resonated with the deep insights provided, I was unsure about making this prescribed ebo. It wasn't that I didn't want the support, it was rather that at the time I had no experience and a limited understanding of exactly what Ifa was. I didn't understand why offerings made to the Orisha on my behalf would be beneficial for me. It was explained to me that the offering would consist of prayers, plants, herbs, and in this specific instance, a chicken for my grandfather. I was vegan at the time and had an aversion to the use of an animal. I thought about it constantly, and upon following an instruction to go to the church and light a candle for my grandfather, I walked in on a Catholic sermon which was all about the benefit of animal sacrifices versus the sacrifice of the blood of Jesus. This advice to go to the church was Cuban influenced. Intrigued by this subject, I sat down to listen. The priest explained that within history and Christianity, there have always been animal sacrifices given, which can be seen in the Old Testament. Apparently, the New Testament was written once Jesus had given his life in sacrifice for everyone, and so he was deemed the biggest sacrifice, and animal sacrifices were no longer required or deemed necessary. This information blew my mind. I had never been Christian, and I didn't see the crucifixion as providing spiritual healing and protection for the masses or myself. Although I had read the Bible, I had missed that Jesus replaced animal sacrifice. And before he was ranked by some as the Son of God within the doctrine, society practiced animal sacrifice for spiritual healing, atonement, and devotion. I therefore could not make the further connection with the Africans who were forced into the triangular trade, having to stop their own spiritual practices when they were enslaved, many of which would have included some form of animal sacrifice. At this time, I was also unaware that Judaism, Hinduism, and other major religions do still incorporate the sacrifice of animals in specific religious ceremonies in the modern world. When you think about it, it is all over the Old Testament. I just hadn't thought about it, the connection between the sacrifice of Jesus and the spiritual sacrifice of animals. I personally do not subscribe to the Bible in any way. Having been told as a child that Christianity was a religion that legalized the triangular trade and was designed to keep people in submission and false self-perception, I found this insight particularly significant. The Bible stories take place in Africa, and Christianity was ranked as pure to its heathen counterparts, which is something I have always struggled with. I knew that my African ancestors were not Christians. In the region of West Africa from where they come, traditional African spirituality was practiced in various forms, cultures, and traditions along the length and breadth of Nigeria, Niger, Ghana, Gambia, Sierra Leone. The Africans had their own things. They had their own angels. They had their own ancestors. Abrahamic religions like Christianity and Islam were brought with Arabic and European enslavers and colonizers. The Orthodox Ethiopian Christian religion is not directly connected to my West African ancestors or their beliefs, even if it is within their own spiritual origin. Systems with ancestral divination at the nucleus are authentic to traditional African spirituality. Papa was a Catholic, and with his discontent in the afterlife, it was evident that Christianity was not keeping him safe and sound. Could it be that in his death he realized this, and that's why he guided me towards Ifa, his true ancestral home? These are the questions I have gained answers for on my Ifa journey, a journey with the West African healing system of culture and antiquity. The only times I have heard about animals being used in sacrifices, apart from for food, was in Christianity and in Obia. As a child, I patronized neither, and I did not see anyone practicing Obia in my family. Whether they did or not is another story for another time. Obia is a Jamaican practice that works with ancestral entities and incorporates aspects of African spirituality in a bid to help and unfortunately often harm people. It is often seen as black magic, although it is used by people for a range of reasons and would fall under traditional healing. Unlike Ifa, it isn't a formal system with a long-lasting oral tradition, a unique cosmology, philosophy, and healing aspect. From what I understand, it is highly secretive, and often the customers have very little knowledge of what spirits and rituals are behind the help they receive. I took time to process this information, and all logic and rationale pointed to me doing my Ebo and allowing my ancestors to show me what they had in store. I haven't shared the entire family history yet, but at this point, true healing and understanding was required and welcome. My grandfather did right to choose me, knowing that I hadn't steered away from the more revolutionary and non-conformist aspect of my childhood. I completed my Ebo and started the journey of living in an ancestrally inspired way. Have you ever come across a house of secrets? In the next episode, I will speak about the secrets that changed my family forever. Ifa is the holder of all secrets, and in the next episode, I will show how, as a child, my ancestral relationships and intuition gave me access to the knowledge that was hidden from those who were around me. This is an enchanted story, as human and as spiritual as possible. I hope it makes you consider your own spiritual journey and the steps you have taken to become who you are today. My name is Linnea, and thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate your likes and comments and have enjoyed your responses to the Life After Death series so far. Please continue to journey with me as I delve further into my personal stories and share with those who you love. The Ifa Dafa mentioned in this video is available at afrobuddy.com for genuine people who wish to seek traditional forms of healing. It has been a pleasure sharing with you. Until the next time, as the old timers would say, apartheid afimo, dem afimo.